So there's been a lot that's been said about what's happening in Philadelphia right now about the president's house, and people are rightfully upset about the erasure of Black history. Now, I did this video last year for our Black History on Tuesday channel and just never had a chance to edit the content and get it out there. But I'm going to share it right now because, this moment is critical. A lot of people don't understand how important this site is, but you got to hear from activist attorney Michael Coard, AKA the angriest black man in America, which he'll break down for you in the video. But he's standing on the site. This is part one. For some reason, I can't get part two to download, and I'm on the road right now, but I really wanted people to have this. It's about 10 minutes long, but it's going to be worth your while as you get to understand why this place is important that held slaves in America's first White House, working for the Washingtons while they argued about freedom and justice for all. This is Black History on Tuesday.
All right, let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, go right ahead, bro.
I like to do it right here because my group, we hold events 3 or 4 a year, and we noticed that while our group is doing its thing, other people stop by and listen. So I want them to listen. So let me start from the beginning. This site here is America's first White House. I'm part of a group called ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And we were founded back in 2002. Pastor, am I giving them the 10-minute story or the 3-hour story?
Right in the middle.
All right. So it goes like this. In 2002, there was a report in local newspapers that the Liberty Bell Center, which was at 5th and Market, was going to move. And the reason why the Liberty Bell Center at 5th and Market was going to move became too crowded, too cramped, too congested. And they decided it would have to move, and it would move from 5th and Market right here to 6th and Market. So I was hosting and still am a local radio show to the Black community. And we heard the story and said, okay, the Liberty Bell Center is moving, no big deal to us. The second thing we found out in 2002 is that the new site, 6th and Market, right here, is where America's first White House stood. And people were shocked to hear that. Back in 1790, there was something called the Federal Residence Act of 1790. It said, hey, we're starting a new government. We want to put our location in DC, but it's swampland. We got to move it temporarily to a temporary site. Let's make it Philadelphia. So under the 1790 Federal Residence Act, Philadelphia became the temporary capital. But Congress said we need a house in Philadelphia. So they found out a guy named Robert Morris, who was one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia. He had the Robert Morris Mansion. Congress said, we'd like this site, 6th and Market. By the way, Market Street back then was called High Street. So they said, we're going to have the president lease a house at 6th and High Street called the Robert Morris Mansion. And that'll be the new president's house. We found out that story in 2002. Our group ATTAC, interesting, but not really relevant to the Black community. But the third thing we found out is that this site, 6th and Market, America's first White House, the new site of the Liberty Bell Center, is where George Washington enslaved Black men, women, and children. I was born and raised in Philly. I went to college. I went to law school. I went to the best middle school in America, Masterman. And not one time did I hear about George Washington, America's first White House, Philadelphia, and slavery. Never heard that story. So once we heard that, we did research. And this will be about a 15, 20-minute presentation. Stop me if you have any questions. So once we found out that America's first White House was here, and of the 316 Black men, women, and children that George Washington enslaved at his Mount Vernon, Virginia plantation, he took 9 of those 316 and held them right here. I'm going to talk later about this glass enclosure called the vitrine. You can actually look down and see the foundation of 1790. I'll tell you how that came to be. But right now, let me just share. So once our group ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, we always make it clear that we like to be called ATTAC because it sounds strong and aggressive and assertive. And people say to us, well, why do you call it avenging? Isn't that kind of threatening? The answer is no, because they don't understand the English language. We're not called revenging the Ancestors Coalition. We're called avenging. Revenge means do the same bad thing to you that you did to me. Avenging means to focus on the victim and tell their story. That's what we do. And by the way, as the pastor said, I do call myself the angriest Black man in America because James Baldwin, one of the greatest thinkers in American history, said to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. But it has to be a productive rage, a constructive rage. So that's what we are. So 2002, Liberty Bell Center moves from 5th and Market to 6th and Market. 2002, we find out that America's first White House is right here. 2002, we found out that slavery existed here. So this group came together and we met with the National Park Service, the people who run this area, Independence National Historical Park. And to my surprise, because I guess they were run by historians, they were receptive to our story. Once we presented to them the fact that slavery existed here, because all they planned to do was to move the Liberty Bell Center and make it bigger and better here, and that's the story. But when we found out about slavery, we said, no, you got to tell the story about American history, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. George Washington might have been a great general. He probably was. George Washington might have been a great president. He probably was. But can you be a great human being when you hold 316 fellow human beings in bondage? So tell the whole story. Tell the story about his accomplishments as a general, as a president, but then tell the stories as an enslaver. So what we did with the Park Service, and we met with their historians, and they conceded. We had our own historians, people like the great Dr. Molefe Asante at Temple University, and people like that. So they gave us all this information from these dusty history books, and we converted that historical information to cultural ammunition. And we made sure that it wasn't just something that scholars would know, but that the public would know. So we met with Independence National Historical Park. We met with the National Park Service. We met with the Interior Department, and we gave them back the same history they knew about George Washington enslaving 316 in Mount Vernon, about George Washington enslaving 9 here. And we said, okay, if you're going to move the Liberty Bell, tell this whole story. As a matter of fact, the Liberty Bell Center, the new one, is right back there. Next to that, about 10 feet, is where the slave quarters stood. So as you enter this heaven of liberty, the Liberty Bell Center, you literally have to cross the hell of slavery physically to get there. I'll talk more about that later. So we met with the Park Service. We told them what we knew about the site. We explained how it was so important. And they said, okay, let's look into it. And then they found out that everything we said about George Washington enslaving people right here, everything we said about 1790 and the Federal Residence Act, everything we said about Robert Morris, the man who owned this site. In fact, he was extremely wealthy, and guess where he got his wealth from? Slavery. So we found out about all of that. We found out about the Gradual Abolition Act, which basically said that if you brought enslaved Africans into Pennsylvania and held them consistently for 6 months, at the end of 6 months, they could apply for their freedom. When George Washington got here, now that was the Federal Residence Act of 1780. Let me back up because I want everybody to follow me on this. So in 1780, there was something called the Gradual Abolition Act. And that act said, if you bring enslaved Africans into Pennsylvania and you hold them for 6 months straight, at the end of those 6 months, because the Quakers ran the legislature here, they could apply for their freedom. When George Washington got here in 1790, 10 years later, he knew about this clause. So what he would do is close to the end of 6 months, 5 months, 29 days, he would take those enslaved Africans and take them across state lines to Jersey or to Maryland or back to Virginia, and then turn them right around and bring them back. He did this, but what he didn't realize is that in 1790, shortly before he got here, there was an amendment to the act. The amendment said, hey, back in 1780, we talked about 6 months, they're not free, they can apply for freedom. But we found out that people were doing exactly what George Washington was doing, waiting for 5 months, 29 days, and then rotating them. So the law was changed to say that you couldn't do that. George Washington continued to do it. We told that story. So we began to tell everything about the story of slavery in America. And the Park Service said, okay, you're right. And I think they said you're right because they didn't really trust the African-centered scholars. But when their Eurocentric scholars confirmed everything we said, they finally said, well, if the white guy said it, it must be true. So I guess it was true. So based on that, they said, okay, we'll do something. And that's what we have here. So what we began to do was to decide that we're going to have some type of monument, some type of memorial. So we were able to pressure the Park Service to hire one of the leading Black architects in the country who happened to be right here from Philadelphia. So he came up with this design. This design is a replica of the exterior of the White House. So those are the gates or the main doors that people went into. These are the big frame windows that George Washington looked out of. And as they were constructing this ground, beginning around 2008, 2009, we noticed that as people came here to watch the construction, they were fascinated by it. And we had this stage and this platform here that people could watch construction. And people were really fascinated about what you see behind us. That's the foundation of the kitchen area. Of the 9 enslaved Africans who were here, George Washington didn't allow them to walk the grounds of the White House. They had to walk through the basement, walk through the kitchen. That's 1790. That's the foundation. And we decided that instead of covering that up, we just exposed that. That's called the vitrine. I must admit at the time I had no idea what a vitrine was, but it's a large glass enclosure. That's it. That's 1790. And then right up against or next to the Liberty Bell Center is the slave quarters. I'm going to show you that in just a couple of seconds. That's where at least 5 or 6 of the men amongst those 9 were housed. It's nothing but a large doghouse type contraption where they were held. And like I said, that setup is about 5 to 10 feet away from the entrance to the Liberty Bell Center. So once we began to bombard them with all this information, they said, okay, let's tell this story. On December 15 of 2010, they had the grand opening of this site. So as you walk in here, they show you a timeline of slavery in America, slavery in Pennsylvania, and slavery right here in Philadelphia. This tells the entire story of the history of slavery. And what we always do is we tie this in to everything in and around this area. We're here at 6th and Market. If you go 5 blocks east to Front and Market, it's the London Coffee House. The London Coffee House was the main slave auction spot in Philadelphia at the time. So as the enslaved Africans came off of the so-called slave ships right there at Delaware and Market, they were brought to the London Coffee House and bought and sold throughout this entire area. I have so much more to share with you, but I just want to know if anybody has any questions. But before I forget, one of the things we really like about this site is that, one, it's an open air site, so people can access it 24/7, and it's motion detecting TV monitors. So as you walk up to about 4 or 5 monitors here, reenactors tell the story of slavery here at this site. We wanted to make it interactive. We wanted to avoid it being boring. And please, question, comment.